There's a story about Edwin Land, who was an optical physicist. I think he was at Harvard. He dropped out. He was a brilliant guy. Edwin Land is in Santa Fe, New Mexico with his daughter. And they're walking down the street or something, and he takes a picture of her with his camera. And she grabs the camera from him, and she looks at it, and she says, you know what she says?
No.
Says, "Daddy, why can't I see the picture?" Edwin Land instantly starts thinking, and within an hour, he's come up with the idea for the Polaroid instant camera. Think about this in a broader context. Like, he's standing there, she's standing there, there are birds in the trees, cars going, all this stuff. Nothing in the world has fundamentally changed. And yet simply by asking a different question, a whole set of assumptions are overturned, and you have essentially something that drove a change in the industry, a significant change. And that is the power of questions.
Welcome to Faces of Innovation. Today, my guest is Josh Cohen, co-founder of Giant Innovation. Today, we're going to be talking about learning to learn in corporate innovation, and we'll get right down to what that actually means in a second. Welcome to Faces of Innovation, Josh. It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We've known each other a bunch of years and seen each other through lots of ups and downs in the innovation world, right?
Yep.
Let's talk, I guess, a little bit about your background, which I think is really interesting, especially starting in entrepreneurship, and then just give us like a one-liner a bit about Giant Innovation before we can get into this really rich topic.
Yeah, sure. So I have been in kind of innovation or kind of innovation adjacent areas for probably 20 something years now. I don't want to go into the details on everything, but I guess I was a startup founder. So I worked for many years kind of building companies, one of which was in Germany, one of which was in New York. Always loved it, always found it interesting. But I think the through line in my career and what I always loved was kind of learning, thinking, and helping others to become better at what they do. So Giant Innovation was kind of born out of this kind of love that I have. I come from a family with psychologists and teachers, and so I think it somehow kind of impacted me. And so I had worked a little bit in investing, I worked in startups, and then about 10 years ago, I met one of my colleagues, David, and we basically kind of hit it off. We had similar aspirations, we saw the world similarly, and we decided to build Giant around the idea of helping people in large organizations to build human capability around becoming more innovative. Right? So this is not just about technology. I mean, it is about technology, but it's also about what can people do? What can the individual do to become better at their jobs such that they can bring new and innovative ideas to the organization? That's Giant.
Beautiful. That's a really good elevator pitch.
Thank you. Thank you. I spent the last 48 hours working on that. So hope I got it right.
You did get it right. I like it. And so when you say innovative ideas, tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that, because I think that there's always been this grand debate between like innovation as a core competency, the separate but different kind of thing, versus the whole innovation is everybody's job thing. So what is your sort of take on that kind of debate? And it sounds like you guys are in the camp of everyone needs upskilling, or maybe not upskilling, but inspiring around what it means to be forward thinking about your role.
Yeah, let me break it down. Let me start with kind of the first half of what you asked. So what does it mean for an organization to be more innovative, right? I mean, what is an organization trying to do? At the end of the day, the organization is trying to provide value for customers, right? And so the question becomes taste shift, need shift, people shift. What can they do to constantly stay one step ahead of that curve, period, right? Like that's what they have to do. That's what being innovative is all about. And the more those things shift, and I'm sure we're going to come back to this, right? In the face of new technologies, in the face of changing preferences, changing organizations, changing governments, whatever it is, the more responsive organizations have to be to that. In other words, the more innovative they have to be, right? So we can start there. Now then you can kind of keep going back, and then you say, okay, well, their goal is ultimately to help that end customer, that person outside the organization. Well, that only happens if the resources in the organization, right? If the organization is able to muster its resources in such a way that I can do that, right? And that's when you start to say, well, okay, then we need the people in the organization to be innovative. We need the processes. We need everything to be structured around delivering that, right? And then we kind of get to the idea that we need to build the skills and the capabilities to do that. And that's what Giant's about. Now, your other question Is
is
it
a whole other
Yeah,
rabbit hole.
yeah, and then I'll start on it, and maybe we
Okay.
can just touch on it, or we
Yeah.
can go deeper. Your other question is, is it a department or is it everyone in the organization?
Right.
Our take on that is it can be both, although probably early on in the innovation game, it leaned a little bit too far in one direction. Early on in the innovation game, it was like, let's set up these departments. We're going to have
Mhm.
these superstars.
Yep.
They're going to do it all, and that's going to cause the organization to change. Turns out
Right.
that didn't work so well. So
Yes.
our take on it and the way we work with organizations is we're saying you have all of these employees. They are smart, well-meaning people who would love to learn new ways to do things.
Mhm.
And Giant goes about training them through workshops and our e-learning modules and different variety of different modalities to do that.
Got it. Got it. Um, I think that I want to dive into this learning to learn topic, which
Yeah,
I
sure.
find super fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, in my experience, there's always been, I'm just kind of setting it up for you. There's
Sure.
always been this debate in the innovation space about capability building versus delivering innovation.
Yeah.
And they kind of are much more interwoven than people expect, actually. But they somehow have been positioned as kind of A or B. And I think that I've observed that there hasn't really been this focus on the word learn, because in some ways, corporate people are really taught at the very beginning that they're supposed to know everything.
Yeah.
And so my observation is really that innovation, because it's so different from core business, it requires people to be humble and really think, okay, I do need to learn not just about innovation, about the business, about the discipline of how it is to develop new things, but also I need to learn to be a different way, or learn to be open to different ways of being, I guess.
Right.
So learning to learn is something I learned from you, actually, that term, and I love it. I'd love you to kind of just break it down, how you came up with it and how it actually manifests itself in the work that you do.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a huge topic, and we could probably spend a week talking about this. But I mean, I always think that any subject we talk about within large organizations extends beyond large organizations, right? I always think it's a mistake to believe it's like there's a large organization world and then everything outside of it
Right.
is something different, right? We're all humans and we're all
Yeah.
connecting in different ways. So think about what knowledge is. Knowledge is how we navigate the world, right? Knowledge are the things we've learned in the past to navigate the world, right? And the things that we've learned in the past are what enable us to get to where we are today, right? If we didn't have knowledge, we wouldn't make it here. If you didn't eat, if you didn't know where to get food, all of these things are absolutely critical in helping you navigate the world, right?
Right.
Okay, so that is your system. That is your pattern in order to succeed. Now, then what happens is you put someone in an organization and they start moving forward and they start doing, a lot of that is determined by knowledge. Right, a lot of it's determined by what you know and how you're able to navigate the organization and the skills you have. Now, the problem starts to become, right, and for years, by the way, this worked really well, right? For
Yeah.
years, when things were somewhat stable,
Being
like
an expert in your discipline, right?
yeah, exactly. And every innovation person loves those statistics on the number, how many years a company was on the S&P 500 in 1927 and today, right? Like we all see what's happening, right? And so the issue becomes, things move faster, things change quicker. You can't hold on to your knowledge, to be blunt, for security. You
Yeah.
can't hold on to your knowledge to keep you, where you are. Now, if you think about the innovator's dilemma is exactly the same thing, right? It's on a corporate level. The innovator's dilemma is that a company sticking to what it knows, to what it's really good at.
Right.
So the question then becomes, well, suddenly, if you can't hold on to your knowledge, it means you have to basically be able to keep refreshing your knowledge in order to keep moving forward. And I think that's what we're facing with right now, right? We have a situation in which a lot of these things we held true, a lot of these things that we could always lean on in order to propel us forward, no longer work. Now, this is not to say that no knowledge is relevant. It's not to say that no knowledge can be held onto. It's just to say that I think, you and I were talking about this before, there's a tension between adaptability and knowledge, right? There's a tension between it, because knowledge, to adapt, you're necessarily overturning something you were doing before, right? So you're constantly in tension with that. And so the question is, how do you balance those two such that you can thrive in an organization?
Definitely. I think it's the term adaptability is um, it's a really beautiful term actually for the work that we do in terms of innovation, because it is about being humble enough to say, "Oh, okay, I don't really know how to do this, but I'm gonna try."
Yeah.
And it's also about, wow, that experiment that we ran, the results aren't totally clear, like 100% what we should do next. Let's try this and this next. Like,
Yeah.
it's really not knowledge based so much as, I guess, experience based or intuition based, and all of that is about adaptability and being ready to face the lack of knowledge,
Yeah,
actually,
I think
is
it's a great
perhaps
way to put it.
what that is.
Operate in conditions of uncertainty, right?
Right.
And constantly being willing to overturn your assumptions. Like that's the point, right? That you're constantly willing to question what you already believe and say, "Hey, this might not be true, but
Mhm.
that's okay."
Right.
Right? And so just even think about what human beings are constantly doing, right? Like, so you talk about this idea of like learning, like every one of us is constantly learning. Constantly. No human, you wouldn't survive if you couldn't learn.
Mhm.
Like it's part of who we are. It's part of the essence of who we are as human beings. But the problem is when that starts to get connected to ego and emotions, then you run into more difficulty.
And status, like in an organization where they're
Status.
constantly judging you. Right.
Exactly. And that's why people start hesitating to change, right? And
Mhm.
so the question is, how can we get people to be comfortable with uncertainty, comfortable with the fact that their knowledge might not be the correct knowledge, which is totally okay, but they might not know that. So then you go on to this topic of learning to learn. And my friend Eric Berger called it being in a mode of learning, which I also love.
Okay.
This idea that Eric's at Visa, by the way, and this idea that we need to constantly be overturning our assumptions and be looking for information that overturns our assumptions,
Okay.
right? Looking for,
That's even further, right.
I mean, and you can draw parallels all over the world, and this just popped into my head. I mean, think about what scientists are doing,
Yeah.
right? Like scientists are constantly trying to
Right.
overturn
The
assumptions
scientific method, yeah, of
that's what it's all
course.
about,
Right.
right?
Yeah, and we also have all this research about biases where basically you assume all sorts of things, and we what if we used to call it the rivers of thinking, and basically
Exactly.
I myself, because of my experiences and my knowledge, I definitely gravitate towards thinking one way. And it's really important, I think, for people to, like you say, to question, oh, why do I think that? Oh, we were just talking about Murphy beds.
Yeah.
My
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 obsession with Murphy beds.
my immediate reaction was no,
Exactly.
no. And then as you were raving about them, even though you don't have one,
No.
I was thinking, oh, well, I was trying to think back as in my childhood, why do I have that fixed
Yeah.
idea about that? And I agree. I really like when I can face some judgment like that and, really wonder where does it come from and why. And in the business context, I think we don't do enough of that because of the whole everybody has to know the answer to everything
Yeah.
mindset, And so tell me a little bit more about learning to learn, because I know you have a real interest in psychology and kind of the the origins of how we, even as a baby, we learn things through having, putting the plug in and getting burned and things like that on the stove. So how does it work for adults to learn? And how do you teach that? Or maybe you don't teach it, you just show people.
Yeah.
How does that all work in terms of your workshops that you deliver to corporates?
Yeah. So let's even talk about it like as little children, because I think it's fascinating, right?
Okay.
If you think about little children want to go out and explore the world, right? They
Yeah.
want to go
Right.
out and
We're
learn,
born
right?
with that
We're
desire.
born with that desire. And a good parenting is about like helping those kids keep moving further and further away from the nest while feeling safe at the same time. Right? That's the idea. So it's like we want to expend our energy, and it actually gives us more energy to go out and grow and thrive and learn new things, right? Now, we can say the same thing about large corporations, right? People come into large corporations with their own, let's call it baggage, for lack of a better
Right.
word,
That's a
right?
really good word. Yeah.
But I don't love the word actually, but it's the best I can come up with. Like their own predispositions, what scares them, what doesn't scare them,
Yeah.
all this kind of their emotional, what they're protecting. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, our goal is to put them in a space where we are, again, for lack of a better word, the parents that are giving them permission to go and thrive. right? How do you create a learning experience somewhat such that someone who might be introverted, someone who might be afraid of taking a risk, is willing to go out and do that? And what you generally find is if you can create conditions in which people feel safe, they feel good, they're having fun, they will start pushing their boundaries, right? That's what the idea is, and that's how we like to do things.
That's great. And how does that work in terms of taking that back into the organization? Both that individual who kind of experienced that, and maybe give us an example of what it is to experience that, and also the organization. Because if you have, I guess, this small cadre of people who've experienced that, and then they go back and get absorbed into the larger organism, how does that become viral like that? Kind of, okay, it's safe to explore. Yeah.
It's a great question. So let me start by talking about what was the first thing you mentioned, because I wanted to talk
Well,
about
maybe
that for
give
a
an
second.
example of how you guys do that. How
Oh,
do you make it feel safe in these,
yeah.
I guess, exercises or experiences that people have in your courses?
Yeah. So I was going to say one thing before I get to
Okay.
that. Maybe
Yeah, yeah,
pause it. You might want to
yeah.
go back to this. Um, we're not talking about fundamentally altering the way people are. That's not what we're talking about, right? Like people have proclivities for certain things. They like doing certain things. Some people want to sit behind an Excel spreadsheet all day, and that is totally okay. What we're talking about is just shifting people enough so that at best they'll become active participants in this type of work, and at worst they'll become supporters of it.
Okay.
Right? That's the
Yeah.
idea. So I don't want you could listen to this and say, oh, that's garbage. There's no way you're going to transform all these people to be hoodie wearing innovators. And that's 100% true. You won't, right?
We
You're
don't have
not
to
going
wear
do
hoodies.
that. I don't know. Does anyone wear hoodies anymore? I don't know. But the point is, you're trying to just get some behavioral shift such that people create an environment in which they're willing to take more risk, in which they're supporting others who do so. That's the
Got
first
it.
thing. Now, your second question, how does it work in terms of, an organization that's trying to change more broadly? And the answer is it's a question of critical mass, right?
Okay.
It's a question of reinforcing behaviors, right? It's a question of how do you reward? How do you support these behaviors? How do you recognize all these behaviors? So let's take a step back again. Individuals are picking up new behaviors that are designed to help them, are that designed to help them work better. Now, why would you not take up another behavior? Why would you not, if I told you something was good for you, why wouldn't you do it? Well, maybe because you don't believe it, maybe because you don't feel safe
Yes.
doing it, right?
Yes.
So there's all these reasons why, even right, we all operate suboptimally, right?
Mhm.
We all have really bad habits. And why do we do them? Because somehow at some point they were advantageous for our system, and we need to replace them with habits that are optimal or good for our systems, or what we believe are good for our system. So the question is, like, how do you do that, right? And that happens on many levels. Like, one is the individual has to learn how to do this. The individual has to see why they're doing this. But then it's more than that. Those that surround them need to understand the why and also need to be doing this. And then the organization itself needs to put the systems in place such that this type of behavior is recognized, supported, and rewarded. So it's a kind of a really complex interplay in
Yeah.
which it's not just as simple as saying to someone, oh, I'm going to teach you how, like you can send one person to an innovation coach. It'll do nothing because they'll be thwarted because nothing will help. No one will
Right.
help them out.
So it starts with the individual, and then it kind of moves outward and creates a community of people who all value those kind of new things, and then ultimately that's spreads across an organization enough such that there is this shift.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think it's both bottom up and top down, right? I was once on a panel where someone in the audience asked an innovation kind of expert. They said, in our organization, we're constrained, we can't do any work. We can't be more innovative. What do we do? And he said, start a revolution. Start a revolution in your organization.
How do you feel about that?
It's not going to work.
Right.
It's just not going to work. So the point is, it's a complex interplay between top down and bottom up.
Mhm.
You will always find that the best organizations, when they transform, it is because the senior management is not just saying do it, but they're also modeling it.
Yes.
They are modeling it. And I can give you a specific example because
Please do.
you're
Yeah.
kind of pushing for specific examples. One of the things I love, I'm philosophically fascinated by the idea of a question, like what it means and what it does. And I'll tell you a story to illustrate this. So there's a story about Edwin Land, who was an optical physicist. I think he was at Harvard. He dropped out. He was a brilliant guy. And Edwin Land is in Santa Fe, New Mexico with his daughter, Jenny. And they're in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they're walking down the street or something, and he takes a picture of her with his camera. And she grabs the camera from him, and she looks at it, and she says, you know what she says?
No.
Says, "Daddy, why can't I see the picture?"
Okay.
Edwin Land instantly starts thinking, and within an hour, he's come up with the idea for the Polaroid instant camera.
Wow.
Okay? Now, think about this for a second. It seems like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. Wow, it's funny how these things happen. But think about this in a broader context. Like, he's standing there, she's standing there. There are birds in the trees, cars going, all this stuff. Nothing in the world has fundamentally changed. And yet, simply by asking a different question, a whole set of assumptions are overturned, and you have essentially something that drove a change in the industry, a significant change. And that is the power of questions, right? That is, I mean, there are studies where they say that little kids whose parents ask more questions of them as opposed to speaking to them and telling them what to do, those kids will be raised more will grow up more inquisitive and get higher grades and be more successful. So we can see already how powerful questions are, right? And so one of the things we will often do in large organizations is the first thing we will do is we'll say, you have to build an organization in which people feel allowed to ask more questions, where they recognize questions as tools, not as a bird. Oh, you're asking me a question again?
Yeah.
Ugh. Okay. Now how does this tie back to what you were saying before? My colleague David, we were working with a large organization. I wasn't there for this, unfortunately, so I could pretend it was me, but it wasn't. So my colleague David was working for a large organization, and he gave one of our workshops on asking questions. And the CEO of this organization was there. And he actually went through it. It was all about kind of unleashing the power of questions.
Fantastic.
And
Yeah.
afterward, he said something to the effect of, I never realized how I never really took advantage of questions as a tool. I never really modeled this. And going forward, I'm going to have to model this much more so that people in my organization understand how powerful this is, and so that they all do it. And so it kind of percolates up through the organization. So the point, to go to your original question, and the point of this is, you see that this is not just a matter of any individual acting a certain way. It's a coordinated effort on the part of the organization in order to bring these new behaviors to life.
Definitely. I understand that. It's like principles also, but then walking the walk and not just talking about them.
Absolutely.
And I think in my experience, it's been really important with leadership, particularly like you were saying with that CEO, because when there's like a growth board who is evaluating ideas that are really early stage, it's important that those leaders ask the right kind of questions about those ideas that are progressing through, because there's all sorts of confusion, I always think, at that stage. Because is it with leadership in corporates, we're often like proving or trying to show or trying to provide an answer. But in the case of this kind of question-based leadership that executives should be taught for growth boards, it's really about just sense checking. Oh, tell me more about the data that you learned. What
Exactly.
excited you? And do you think it's
Exactly.
enough? And why is or it isn't enough? And I always thought it's really okay also to take it to the next level and for people to say, I don't know yet.
Of course. Of course.
And that also is very taboo. So I think the asking questions is taboo. Saying I don't know is taboo. Asking for help is taboo.
Yeah.
It'd be great if all of these things could be reframed as growth strategies.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah. I mean, I'll on the subject of questions, and then we can kind of end it if you want to. But an interesting thing about questions is, what you were saying before is my mother actually was a teacher. And she always said to me, like, the point of a good test isn't just evaluation, right? It's helping the learning process, right?
Yes.
And it's the same thing with a good question. So when you talk about that example, like, the question isn't just designed as a zinger, like, I gotcha, right? The question, a good question
Yeah.
should be helping the person move along throughout their process.
Right.
Right. And I think that's really the key. It's not just like, when you say asking questions are important, there are studies. There was a study done at Harvard, I think, about dating, about speed dating. And what they basically found is the more questions you ask, the more likely you are to get a follow-on date. Right. Now, I didn't read the research. I fully admit it. I only saw this referred to somewhere. But my guess is if you ask inane questions, right, you're not going to get the follow-on date. So the issue isn't just like, let me throw out as many questions as I can. It's always like, are my questions focused? Are they relevant? Are they specific? Right?
Right. And helping the person get to where
Exactly.
they want to get to.
Exactly.
Right. And
Exactly.
so the growth growth mindset
Yeah.
topic, I think is a good natural kind of direction for us to go now. And I wonder, I mean, let's just start with your interpretation of that phrase because I think it just means so many things
Yeah.
to different people. And it connects, I think, very much to this humility topic that we've been covering now, which is, wanting to learn, being okay with uncertainty and curiosity and all of the above. But how do you see it manifested, for example, in the humans that go through your courses? How do you see a change, for example, in how people experience that after they've learned a bit more or had this safe place that
Yeah.
you've provided for them?
Yeah.
It's not built in 2 days, right? This growth mindset.
Correct. Yeah, so it's a great question. And so first of all, like growth mindset, what does it mean? And we were talking about this
Yeah.
before. I'm not a huge fan of quote defining things.
Okay.
Because I think that what our goal ultimately is to acquire behaviors and learn certain things that then become obvious to us afterward. And what I mean by that is, we teach design thinking often, or the principles of design thinking. I could give you 15 different definitions of design thinking depending on the day of the week, and I think they'd all be correct. So to me, growth mindset is all of what we just discussed, right? And I'm not saying that Carol Dweck defines it this way. I'm just saying like this is the way I feel it. It's
Yeah.
kind of being so first of all, it's this idea that you accept the fact that you are an evolving entity that's learning new skills and abilities, right? I think that's kind of the starting point. And then there's all these things that flow underneath it, right? It's like, taking loving challenges or kind of learning from challenges, viewing criticism or feedback as information, right? All these things, being able to react in conditions of uncertainty, recognizing the importance of effort and the learning it produces rather than the outcome, right? I think all of these things are so important. But again, in theory, all this stuff sounds great, but it's always when you tactically apply it that becomes more difficult. So then your question is, do I see change around this? And the answer is yes, absolutely. But what I always say is change like this does not happen in a day, right? And so one of the things at Giant we do is we never will do like a 1-day workshop, end of story. It always needs to be connected to something else, some follow on, so that people can reflect on what they've done, see what they learned, see how their behaviors have changed. So that way it reinforces what they've learned, right? Because so much of this is one about you and your personal goals and assessing what you've done and being aware of it and seeing how it's changed. And then two is how that impacts and how others around you are also growing and thriving. So
Right.
that's extremely important for us.
Yes. And I love this point about the time to reflect on it thing because I think that is something that we never allocate time for. Like we're constantly listening to podcasts or
Yeah,
going to
100%.
conferences and what I try to do after I go to a conference, for example, is to spend a little bit of time just debriefing in my head about what I learned.
Yeah.
But sometimes there just isn't enough time. So I think that that's really critical that you guys teach in those kind of cohorts or those follow-on things because I think people can build upon the baseline and keep kind of graduating to different levels,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And yeah,
Yeah,
good.
because you're going to learn when you go through a workshop or coaching or a boot camp with us, you're going to learn certain things and you're going to practice those certain things. Like we're a big believer in kind of learning by doing, right? And all this stuff goes like from the research point of view, all this stuff goes way like John Dewey was a big proponent of this, like learning by doing. And this stuff goes way back 100 years ago, right? And so we're big believers by learning by doing. And certainly when you do something new and you do it in a different way, that's great for you and maybe you'll pick something up. But you're going to need to come back to it again and again and again and again in order for that to keep working.
Right. And it's also uncomfortable. Like
It can be, yeah.
being thrown in and then maybe your first exposure to it is scary or yeah, you have some association with it that wasn't necessarily the best. But I mean, you obviously want to create the conditions where people are feeling okay and safe, as you said. But I do think there's a certain amount of stretch that happens when people
Yeah.
have to do new things. Like I was telling you, I used to play violin in orchestras and we just constantly had to sight read and just dive in. And I think it taught me to a certain extent that you just have to try. And maybe that comes from my family also. You never know. But like, I assume that probably, as you say, people come with their own baggage. I know you didn't like that word, but a lot of people that are in these courses that you run probably are at, they come with very different
Yeah.
types of sort of affinities towards learning, or affinities towards being creative,
Yeah.
affinities towards, um, you know, research, consume with
Yeah.
people and consumers. So how do you, I guess, address all those different ways of learning and the different things that people, the attitudes perhaps that people might have about doing this?
It's a great question. So let me give you the background on this and you can stop me anytime. But, my philosophy on people in general is that every single human being on this planet is capable of learning a heck of a lot more than they do. Right. And what happens is our society starts telling them, or people around them start telling them what they're, quote, good at and what they're bad at. And that determines what their future is. Right. How often do you hear someone say, I'm bad at languages? Or I'm bad at math. And to me, those statements are really meaningless. They don't mean it. What does it mean to be bad at math? The person better than you solved a problem quicker than you could, or I'm bad at language. I don't know how to learn the foreign language. It's not true, because you could drop anyone in a country where they couldn't speak the language. And if no one spoke to them in English and they were American, they would learn the language. So my point is only that a lot of the constraints we put on ourselves in terms of what we're good in and what we're not are baked into us as we age. And so the
Yes.
question for me is always, to what extent can I uncover what's already there? And I think we can do it more than we think we can. And I think the environment has to be one in which people feel safe in order to do that, in which they need to stop thinking like, I'm not good at X. I'm not a creative person. And one of the things we'll do is we will do exercises in this workshops where we've done a lot of work with engineers, with operations people, with kind of people in traditional organizations that are used to working a certain way. And we'll have them do a variety of activities where they'll suddenly realize, wait, I can be creative too. Now, again, I'm not saying that this person should go out and write a Broadway show, right? That's not my point, right? My point is just that they can get incrementally pushed a little further. Okay, so that's kind of the underlying point. Then you asked, so how do you deal with these different styles? And we're teaching. We're not necessarily always, or we're trying to change behavior in kind of group settings. We're not necessarily like assembling perfect teams, right? Like that's a different part of our work, but that's not what
Yes.
we're talking about right now.
Right.
And so when you're teaching, as any teacher will tell you, you have to teach to optimize the learning for as many people as you can in the room. So you have to do various things. It's the way you speak to people. It's the support you give people. It's the visual tools you learn. It's the balance between visual and audio. I mean, all of these things are going to tie together in order to reach the most people in the most effective way. I mean, one example, which is very simple, you can say is, when you're running a workshop that's designed to help people learn new skills and skills they might not necessarily be comfortable with, you can't come out of the gate with, what do they say, with the guns blazing? Is that what the expression is? You can't come out of the gates with the guns blazing. So the point is, I can start a workshop, and any facilitator will tell you this, by the way. I can't do the activity at the beginning of the day that I would do at the end of the day, because that will isolate the introverts,
Right.
right?
Right.
I'll give you another example. Engineers. I love working with engineers. They're the most difficult often to work with, but they're
Yeah.
also the best. And I've done a lot of work with German engineers. If you want to add another layer to this, we talk about our love of Germany, right? German engineers. Okay. So what's the problem? We once ran a workshop in which it was a beautiful view of Manhattan. Picture this. Workshop, we're on the 40th floor of a building. We're overlooking downtown Manhattan. It's wonderful.
Right.
We get there, we start doing our work. A guy stands up, engineer. He literally turns his back towards us and starts reading the books on the shelves behind us. He's trying to show us the signal
Yeah.
that
He's not interested.
this is not for him.
Right.
Now, how could I have gone on this? What's with this guy? I could have
Right.
got annoyed. I could have said, this is garbage, right? No, you don't. You just say, okay, I'm going to stick with this and see what happens.
Right.
So in the particular case of an engineer, you're going to need some credibility to what you're doing. So we make sure we sprinkle a lot of credibility. We make sure we're saying why this works, why it's to his advantage to do this. By the end of the 2-day workshop, this guy was the converted. He
Wow.
loved it. He was involved. And I've seen this many, many, many times, right? And he, as an engineer, and I think engineers are amazing because once they get it, they realize there's another way. Like my guess is, and I don't know this, so I'm going to take this with a grain of salt. My guess is that engineers feel very safe in their world. That's just a guess. Like
Yeah.
spreadsheets, numbers, all these things, they feel very safe. They're very controlled, right?
Right.
And so moving outside of that is difficult for someone.
Mm.
And so I'm not sure if that's correct, but it's something I just thought of. So my guess is that this person, this individual, actually saw another way to do something and it thrilled him. And I see this all the time with engineers. Once they see it, they love it. But it takes them, and this is not everyone, obviously, but it
Yeah.
takes them, you really have to speak to them in the way they speak.
That's a really inspiring story. And I guess it's the same for a finance person or maybe not even bulking them by their discipline, but it's just like this person, that person, this person have different doorways in.
I can give you another example. Yeah,
Right.
if you
Yeah.
want another one. I know you
Yeah.
love examples. So you also have people who are numbers people, finance people who think that it's all just about the numbers and there's no human component to it.
Mhm.
The other day, this was maybe it was last week, I was running a workshop and someone said to me, so there's this concept of jobs to be done, which I'll say it pretty quickly. And the jobs to be done basically says every customer is trying to fulfill functional, like task related goals, jobs, outcomes, emotional ones, and social ones. And so emotional, how they want to feel or avoid feeling, social, how they want to be perceived. So I was doing this lecture for actually someone or this workshop for people in finance, I think it was. And she said, well, wait a minute. My plumber just has to do a task, right? Like I'm the customer. I only want the task done. The task is I want my sink fixed. And I said, yes, except if you're not confident, if you don't feel confident that this plumber can do a good job, when he leaves, you're going to be checking your sink every 10 minutes. So the job, somehow what he's trying to do is not only just fix a sink, but implicit in his job is that he's giving you the confidence that he does that. So it's not just a matter of a task.
Right.
There's always something you're trying to give your customer that also has an emotional component too,
Yes.
right?
That is so true.
Even an
And
engineer.
letting people see that dimension, it's almost like they are opened up to a new
100%.
way of thinking, right?
100%. And like
Yeah.
that's the idea. And what I generally find is most people aren't bad. Most people don't act the way they act because they have some nefarious, cruel intention, like some sort of Disney or evil witch or something, right? They're just people in organizations who are trying to do the best they can. And so what we often find is that when you start to show people different ways of doing things that make sense, they start to slowly, slowly open up to them. And the greatest thing is, I mean, you were there before when I looked at this email, when the guy said to me, all these years later, we still talking about what we did with you. And that is why I teach. That is why I love teaching. Because that is why I love impacting people and driving change, because you're helping people in their jobs and their careers and their lives do better at what they do.
Yeah, I love this in their lives also.
In their life, yeah. I mean, because the organization is not discrete. It's not like it's not like Severance, right? And I think this is one of the things
I
that
haven't
Severance
watched it.
plays with.
Yes.
Like this idea that like you could go and like it makes no sense if you think about it, but we're not going to go into that. You go to the office, there's one person, and then you leave and there's another person. But in a way, it's almost as though we kind of look at it that way by trying to build skills within the office that don't necessarily apply outside of the office. You can't change inside the office and not change outside the office. It's all a continuity.
Right. I mean,
It's
I've heard
all a
people like
continuity.
go home and practice interviewing skills and observational skills on
Yeah.
their partner, and people are like, wow, it really worked. I learned more, for example, by asking questions at home and being more curious. And I
Yeah.
think people can sometimes just take those principles and apply them in really fascinating ways in their life. And then I think it really starts to take hold because people start to own the principles of it because it kind of worked in their context.
Yeah.
They're slang about it kind of being really personal, you know, just embodying some of the things
I
that
think
you learned.
I think
right?
embodying is actually the perfect word for it, because once you cannot just go home and shut it off. It's not like, you learn how to deal in conditions of uncertainty in work and then you go home and you keep doing the same thing you always did. It can't work that way. It
Right.
doesn't. They're both interplay. They're both, and this is why. And this is kind of the joke about severance, like this idea that you just shut it off when you leave, right? The idea that, like, if you're, I mean, imagine a super intense job, whatever that job is. Like, you're a heart surgeon, you're you're a police officer. There's always going to be some impact of that on your home life. Like, who you are at home is always going to be driven by what you do at work, and what you do at work is always going to drive what you do at home. So I think the point is, where are we going with this? It feels like a bit of a rabbit hole. But the only point I'm trying to make here is that you have to understand that things you're doing outside of the office in terms of yourself and inside of the office are all related.
Right. And let's go into this topic that you also mentioned recently
Sure.
about how um, it was this intersection between kind of learning and therapy.
Ah,
And
yeah.
kind of, I guess you were talking about just the curiosity about oneself is kind of where it starts.
Yeah.
And then that translates into curiosity in different domains like your work. And did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think, one of the things, if you read about, again, I have not read the book Growth Mindset, but I've read enough about it kind of around to have, I think, a sense of it, or maybe even not from Growth Mindset, but what people will say is like, recognize your negative thought patterns. Like,
Right.
right. And I don't know if this comes right from Growth Mindset, but like, see when you judge yourself, see when you're critical of yourself, see when you get feedback and you attack it, all of this kind of stuff. This is right out of mindfulness meditation. This is right out of starting to see the thought patterns in your head as they unfold. And I promise you, if this is happening to you at work, it's also happening to you at home. It can't not be the case,
Right.
right? Like, if you're getting really defensive about feedback in work, it's happening at home. So my only point is, like, as you think about your career and as you think about driving change and as you think about becoming more adaptable and more innovative and all of these things, start thinking about the things you can do when you're not in the office as well. Right? I mean, I started meditating 10 years ago, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert because I don't even know what that means, but I meditate, and I found it's had profound effects for how I deal with people and work. What I think about things when they happen, how I feel, what I notice, when that little voice says, you're not good. And this happens to everyone, by the way, right? Everyone has that little voice. You can't stop it. So when that little voice starts speaking to me, I see it. That's the idea.
Wow. Like observing your thoughts and
Observe your
therefore
thoughts.
being aware of them and therefore being able to potentially adapt and do other things
Yeah.
when you are aware of them, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can't change something. I think a lot of people have said this. Maybe Peter Drucker said it. Moshe Feldenkrais, I think, said it. You have to be aware of something first to change it. If you don't know it, you're not going to be
Yep.
able to change it, right? And so awareness, like, how are you going to stop the negative self-talk? How are you going to stop all of this stuff? And I say, quote, stop, because I don't think you can actually stop it, but I don't want to go down that rabbit
Yeah,
hole. For
shift
those
it.
of you who
Shift it.
meditate,
Right.
you'll know what I'm talking about, but I don't think you can stop it. But the point is, how do you change your relationship with all of those thoughts if you're not aware of them in the first place? And the answer is, or the complicating factor is, most people don't even see them.
Right. So do you start your courses with meditation?
No, but
Thinking about moving in that direction?
it's funny you ask this. I'm always, but no, it's funny. It's in like, kind of at a meta level, like coming back to what we're talking about before. It's like, I often think, when I consider like my own kind of journey around, my own personal journey outside of work, I often think, how can I incorporate more of these things I've learned into what I teach other people? Because I do think they're valuable. I just haven't figured it out yet.
Right. Well, these things are kind of converging already a bit. I think the whole idea of kind of who you are and how you develop yourself in your private life is merging with who do you want to be professionally and how are you taking care of yourself and what do you see as the definition of success. And I think it will maybe in 10 years be a thing where in work you have meditation rooms and people have the option to do that, never like compulsory, but people will start taking that on board, especially companies that really want to grow and be successful at things like innovation and new product development and
I
stuff.
think
It's
some
just
companies already do have that. I think maybe Google might,
really
although I'm not sure.
okay.
I think some companies have thought about that before. But yes, that's exactly right. Like, how do we, if you go to Sweden, for example, you'll find that they integrate work and life so much better. It's almost like in our society, we're pushing against work at the same time we're working. So the point is, yes, we have to recognize that anything we do outside of our office, we're not living in Severance. Or I didn't see the whole actually, I should qualify by saying I haven't seen the whole season, so maybe what I'm saying will actually be confirmed. But the point is, we can't separate what we are at home from what we are at work, and the better we can kind of harness those two things, the better we will be at our jobs.
I agree completely. I've never understood necessarily the literal interpretation of work-life balance because I think that feels like something from another century. We just because of the internet, because of so many
Yeah,
things,
yeah,
remote working, etc. I don't think we'll ever have that again, but what we
yeah.
might have is some sort of harmonious solution that, as you say, the best things cross the barrier between the two dimensions. Actually, things like, learning adaptability,
Yeah.
learning to understand and watch your thoughts, all of that stuff.
I mean, it's an interesting point when you think about how our society pushes things into buckets a lot. Like this is this time, this is that time, and like we both love music, so I'll give that an example. Like, if you think about the way piano used to be learned, I played piano, so I'm fascinated by the pedagogy of piano playing.
Oh, you're one of those piano people.
Yeah, one of those piano players. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm fascinated by that. And so one of the things I often think about is if you think about probably the way people used to learn the piano, it probably was integrated into like the family somehow. I'm guessing they would probably sit around. They didn't have a CD player or a record player or a MP3 player,
Right.
whatever. They didn't have it. So someone would be playing the piano. They'd probably be singing together, right? It sounds like a Dickens right story or something, right? But the point is like they'd all be sitting around doing it. So it would be piano playing would be integrated into the life as opposed to like go practice for an hour.
Right. On
Right.
your
Go
own.
practice on your own and say the da na 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 na.
Right.
Right. And you're like, oh my gosh, that sounds awful. And so think about what the implications are of that art. Music is like a thing in and of itself as opposed to a continuity with the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. An extension or
An
an intersection. Right.
Exactly. And I think the more we can make things an extension or an intersection of our lives, the more we'll enjoy it and the better we'll be able to do it.
Wow, I really like that.
You're gonna go think about we can come back and we can do
Okay.
self-reflection in 6 weeks.
Definitely, we
See
should
what-
do that. All right. Well, I just want to close on a kind of a big question.
Already? Can we just start?
Sean, we are at time, aren't we, or no?
Yeah, we're about 50 minutes. in.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I was going to ask you this question about like, well, two options. Okay. Door A is I ask you a question about like, give me some examples about like impact in organizations.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Or maybe a more edgy question is something about where do you see what you're doing and how it will be different or the same in 5 years? Which do you prefer?
I mean, either one's fine. You can do the second one. I mean,
Or another one. What would you like to talk about? I should give you that option. Yeah.
no. What was the first one again?
The first one is just about specifically like the work that you do and the impact, which may be a little bit literal at the moment. But you haven't talked about that a little.
Yeah, I
Give
can
us
talk about that.
words.
Yeah, we can do it. We can do impact. That's fine.
Or we could do both, maybe.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
yeah, just that's fine.
Okay. Do I need to say that closing thing again, or no? You're gonna cut that, aren't you, Sean?
I'm gonna cut.
Okay, good, okay.
If you want to,
Okay,
yeah,
I will.
start with
Okay.
and finish off.
Okay.
However you want it.
Okay. Okay, just to finish off, I have two kind of very different questions for you. The first one is really about impact. And I know that's kind of the endless talk in the innovation space is like, what impact are you having? And I know we discussed that it's kind of a slow burn. And yeah, individuals are individuals, and then they're a collective, group. And then there's an organization, and there's all these different levels of change. But maybe, Josh, do you have some stories about beyond the guy that emailed you, which was incredible how many years ago you've done that and they still remember, but like, how do companies experience the work that you do, and how does it actually shift people's mindsets in the long term, or if it does?
No, it's a great question. The answer is no, it doesn't. So unfortunately, we have no impact. No, of course, like you look very serious when I said that. You're like, wait a minute,
believed you.
what? Stop this podcast. No, okay. So the answer to that is that when organizations kind of commit to what we're doing, they'll generally roll out bigger programs. And those bigger programs will kind of be a very calculated approach to systematically increasing the skill level, behaviors, mindsets of people within the organization, right? And so you'll start to see this in a bunch of different directions where you'll see the impact. You can talk about a quantitatively, you can talk about it qualitatively. Quantitatively, you start to see how people are coming up with more ideas, how they feel more free in terms of the way they work on their job. They're asking more questions, they're running more experiments, all of these things that you can kind of survey and look at that. On the quantitative side, you'll start to hear the stories about that people just tell you. And those are the ones I actually like. I mean, I love the surveys and I love seeing that impact, but what I also love is just talking to people, right? That's because I'm motivated by people. And just when someone says to me like, oh my gosh, your workshop changed my life and I'm getting a new job. Don't worry, everyone. Not everyone goes to look for a new job, but some people will get different jobs in the organization because they just love this type of work.
Right.
So it's the qualitative and the quantitative. But the real point here is that what you'll start to see is a shift in any division. Sometimes it's division, sometimes it's team, sometimes it's the whole organization around these behaviors we talked about. You'll have people asking more questions, being more experimental, and ultimately creating new sources of value. Because at the end of the day, like all of this stuff is just an abstract unless people are creating new products, creating new services, or internally doing things better. So we will look at the number of products that are being spun out by organizations. We'll look at the press they're getting. We're looking at what the people say. We're looking at the revenues, all of these things, right? You and I both know I would love to take credit for all of my clients' increases in revenues, right? I would love to say like, yeah, we did that, by the way. We basically transformed that whole organization and now they're, the stock price has gone up 50%. But that's a little bit more difficult. And we all know that in the world of innovation. But the point is you can start building the picture as you kind of look at all these different variables.
Got it. That does sound like you can actually get a good sense in what, a year's time, or is it like you measure across?
It depends on what you're measuring, right? Like if it's a team of individuals, you can do that fairly quickly.
Right.
When you start to get to bigger organizations, when we're rolling out kind of these comprehensive programs where you're getting like 10, 20 workshops, you're getting coaching, you're getting all these different, you're actually changing the structures or the governance processes, the rewards, right, in the organization, then it becomes a little bit of a longer term proposition.
A transformation.
Yeah.
A revolution.
Exactly. Exactly. Start revolting. Exactly right.
Yeah. Start revolting. That is a good message. I like it.
It's not what we say. I just want it said. That's not what we say. Okay, go ahead.
So I guess the last question really for you is, so where is this all headed? Can you see on the horizon, like in 5 years, let's just say, do you think we're still going to be doing the same types of work with companies, or is there going to be really different focus based on, all the AI stuff? Or is there always going to be a need really for people to do this kind of capability building?
Okay, here's what I say. Things are changing. We talked about this before. Things are changing more than ever before, right? Including AI, which is insane the rate at which it's progressing, right? And so you take something like prompt engineering. Your ability to write a good prompt is going to be driven by your ability to think critically, your ability to kind of like pre-frame a question, maybe you could call it, right? Your ability to even ask questions. And so our fundamental belief is that if people are going to keep getting better at their jobs, if people are going to keep remaining relevant, it's not going to be the specific skill that matters so much. It's not going to be, can I use Excel, right? It's not going to be, can I use this technology? It's going to be, can I adapt such that I am ready for whatever change comes, right? And there again, you get to this idea that there's adaptation, there's the ability to adapt, and there's knowledge. So I'm not saying that knowledge is important. And I think this is one of the mistakes that's often made by, people who are younger, is they'll miss the idea that like even if that other person who's been around for 20 years doesn't understand the technology, there's still things they know, having seen so much, that will enable them to be beneficial. And by the way, that's vice versa too, because there's
Yeah.
always a tension between generations. So it's not critical of either one. It's just simply how it is. So one of the points is, I think that our job is going to be to keep teaching people how to learn, period.
Love it. Thank you so much.
You're
That
welcome.
was a great conversation.
You're welcome. It was
So
fun.
fun to spar with you.
Yeah, we can do it again.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.